Thank you very much. I'm Bob, and I was the initial person who set up the program, DIY Dads for Hobart City Mission. I guess the initial aims of the program was an identification of need. That is, there were a lot of men that had their children who were homeless and that they needed somewhere to go. We also recognised that a wraparound supported accommodation service could be provided, identifying strengths and goals in the traditional way, and then helping them reach those outcomes. And that was the logic that we started with back in 2016. Since then, we've gone through 4 years very nicely. 22 families have come through. 7 are still engaged out there. And I just described the premises as well. It's a block of 9 units, 2-bedroom units, and one of the units is set aside for an office space and community space as well. There's a set of playrooms in the old garages downstairs, a workshop and a veggie garden with a playground, and all the units are centred around a quadrangle, which creates an environment of community. I guess the statistics that show or have come through out of the 29 families that have either been through or still there have been 53 children. Most of them have been in the 0 to 5 category, and the middle group being the second most populous group, and the last one, teenagers. So 24 0 to 5s, 17 6 to 10-year-olds, 6 and 12, 11 to 18-year-olds. With that is a whole group of extended children associated with the men, because they do have multiple partners, and over a course of a lifetime, many of them have had second or even third sets of children. And which brings us to the age group of the men that are there. Most of the men that have come through have been certainly 30 to 45 age group as a predominant group. Not so many as the younger group. We've only had a few that have been under 20 and a couple well over 45. I guess the most telling statistic that we've had out of the place is that the full-time dads have gone on to permanent accommodation with their children very successfully. For the part-time dads, it's been a different story altogether. And out of that came a lot of questioning about what were we attending to, where the dad had a lot of downtime and only had the children maybe every second weekend or up to 50% of the time. So that was definitely a teething problem in the early days. Another teething problem, which was quite apparent, was the difficulty in attending other services. So thinking through a wraparound service, trying to help the blokes identify what they needed to attend to, and then do the traditional referring out. Now, it didn't really happen that way. The men were reluctant to go to places, everything from parenting to counselling, mental health, substance misuse. They were very unwilling to address it outside their environment. So the idea came that maybe we just need to bring services in. And that's how I happened across Dr. Ron Frey, who was quite willing to come along and have a look at it. And it raised also just continually trying to rethink the program. Why aren't we addressing the needs, particularly around parenting, where the men always expressed a high level of parenting. They always scored quite high on that when asked at the initial interview. And also, I guess, not identifying any parenting issues that they wanted to work on. So that was another teething issue in the early days. Yeah. I guess what we're looking at is a very unique population of men. And am I handing over to you now, Ron? Or
Not yet.
Going? Yeah. And this group is, I guess, really hidden away quite strongly, because they are often couch surfing, moving around until they get their children, and moving in and out of relationships as well. They certainly face difficulties on all levels, being practical, emotional, and particularly around parenting, in addition to being homeless. And we know in traditional family support services that if you're homeless and you've got a family, it's also very difficult to work with the children. And the children coming into the place showed lots of interesting behaviours that we'll probably talk about in later slides. So there is this churn between housing and homelessness that goes on throughout the men's lives. Now, most have serious financial problems coming in. They have serious debts with Service Tasmania and Housing Tasmania. And they've usually got a string of other debts as well to other people who often come calling the debts in. And almost every one of them have not had a driver's license coming in, where they've either had it impounded through the debts or have elapsed into never having to go for the license again. Most have received a mental health diagnosis at some stage during their life, and very reluctant to engage back into those services. Most have been victims of violence and used violence against others. The men that have come in, who are definitely between their 35 and 45 age group, have a fairly entrenched way of life, which has caught up with them quite late in life. And it's interesting to see how they face up to that. Most have had some sort of involvement in the criminal justice system at some point in their life, and very reluctant to reveal it at first meeting for the first 12 weeks. And after that, after the relationship builds, it starts to come out more and more. Most have had difficulties and negative expectations navigating government and community services. This fear masquerades as hostility in their interactions. This comes with a lot of literacy challenges and procedural challenges. They'd much rather stick a Centrelink letter in the bin than read it. It's also led to the homelessness problem, that every 6 months they have to fill out a Housing Tas letter, and they get them in the mail and they just throw them away. So this creates very structural problems throughout their life. There is an almost universal problem with getting adequate sleep at night. Often they're up and down through the night or out in the courtyard smoking and trying to compose themselves with their anxiety. Substance abuse is apparent. Drinking can be at high levels on coming into the program, but definitely marijuana is the product of choice. And it's a very interesting way to try and work with it and to keep it at low levels. Diet nutrition for themselves and their children is questionable. It's always the quick foods, the most easiest, and that usually comes about because of their lack of understanding of how to cook and what's appropriate foods. There's experience in social disconnection and anxiety. Quite often they have very limited friends, very disconnected to family, past and present, and they keep very much themselves and very wary of the other, which is always interesting, trying to build a community around a very small quadrangle. There's self-care and physical and oral health issues, everything from diabetes to obesity, not attending to injuries from the past, which are creeping in middle age. And this runs under the children as well, with oral health issues and problems around nutrition. And of course, that rolls onto self-care with emotional needs. Always learning to talk about difficulties emotionally, past and present, and with their children, learning to express themselves in a way that doesn't reveal an inner, I guess, fragility that might be there. Historical relationships and challenges which prevent engagement in some communities, locations, and hence limiting long-term housing solutions. So that ability to be able to relate and learning to talk in a manner that doesn't shut you out from services and locations. There's a long history of that with the men as well. I'll hand over to Dr. Ron Frey to talk through the next 3 slides.
I hope you can all see me. Yeah, I've been asked to talk mostly about how the developmental history of the men impacts on their parenting. So that's what I'm going to address. These men have come, for the most part, from histories of abuse and violence, family violence, all sorts of abuse and neglect. As we mentioned, involvement in the criminal system, involvement in families, departmental care. We found that many of them left home early in their early adolescence, and a number of them became parents at quite early ages while still teenagers, at least for the first time. And almost all of them were exposed to family violence at some point. But the one thing that really surprised us most was the very high rate of sexual abuse against these men. We know from various statistics that the sexual abuse of men and boys is very much underreported. I think David Finkelhor estimated that it was about 1 in 7 boys were abused before the age of 18. But there is reason to believe that there may even be a higher amount of sexual abuse against boys in the community. What we found with these men is that usually something would happen involving their children, and then they would admit that they had been abused as children themselves. Often the men first revealed it to someone who was involved in the program, either Bob or Dave or myself. And they had probably not talked to anyone about it. As we know from the Royal Commission, there's a huge gap between when men are sexually abused and when they report it, much about 3 or 4 times the amount of time as for women, where there's also a fairly large gap. So these are men who are trying to come to terms with this in their basically early middle-aged years. We think that this actually has some impact on how the men actually parent. And as someone who has been involved in the development of the Salvation Army Start Today Again, we've tried to look at men as parents. There are a number of things about this group of men that are probably worth thinking about as parents. The first one is there's no question that these men are dedicated to their children and are really very fiercely loyal to them. And really want to do a good job as parenting. But what we find is they face a number of challenges, almost triple, quadruple whammies, as it were. And the first one is often the children have not always lived with the father and often came into their care through a child protection emergency. And then finding themselves homeless, they came into the program. So what often happens is there is no long history of the father with the child. Sometimes there is, but often it is much more sporadic. They've had contact and lost contact, or they've had partial contact or a weekend access, or these sorts of things. So often they're parenting in this situation almost for the first time, which means that they're trying to build a relationship with their child under situations of duress. The homelessness is itself duress. Plus every other issue that they're also dealing with. They may be employment, it may be poverty, it may be drug and alcohol, mental health, it can be any of these things. So already they're trying to build relationships when they themselves have been impacted by life events. But the next whammy is, so have the children. What we find is the children often come in with fairly serious developmental delays, reactions to previous trauma, and we find almost universally they have difficulty regulating their emotions and their behavior. We often have to go to schools and other places to try and help the parents negotiate with the schools different issues that involve the children as well. So the children are also under stress. They're with parents under stress and trying to build relationships in a stressful situation. In addition to that, we found that the men basically have very few good models of parenting that they've been exposed to. So they generally have not had good parenting in their own childhood. And these are generalizations. There are lots of exceptions, of course. But generally, they haven't had good parenting in their own childhoods. And as a result of that, they have limited intuitive parenting skills. And tend to, which is a point further down, but tend to be rather authoritarian with the children, as presumably their own parents have been fairly authoritarian with them. They also often have a volatile relationship with the child's mother, if a relationship at all. This can sometimes escalate even to physical harm when the child's mother organizes friends to attack the premises, for example, or things along those lines. So it can escalate in a variety of different ways. Sometimes there is no relationship at all. Only rarely is there a good cooperative parenting relationship. Most are unaware of the needs of children and the developmental stages of children, and they often hold unrealistic expectations for the children. This is compounded by the fact that the children are already further behind the developmental stages than we might expect for their ages. I've mentioned the authoritarian parenting. And as a result of this, of all of this, one of the things that we found is that even though the men, as Bob mentioned earlier, value parenting highly, they often are very unaware that they could use parenting support. The men tend to be focused on practical needs for understandable reasons, such as housing and getting a driver's license, these sorts of things. But often they're not as aware that they could build better relationships with their children with parenting support. And often they're not even really aware that there is an activity called parenting and that there are better and less effective ways of doing it. It's sort of like, this is how you are with your child. This is how, my dad was with me. This is how we just interact with children, and that's that. And we've wondered what if having been abused themselves sexually as children might have an impact on the way they parent as well. And we thought of actually a couple of things that might indicate that. These are not the only things. We're not saying that the parenting occurs as it does because of sexual abuse, but rather that sexual abuse can contribute in several ways. And the first one is it's fairly well known from many studies and work that's been done with fathers, with men, who have been sexually abused, is they differ in a couple, and mostly they do not differ. The impact of sexual abuse on men does not differ from the impact of sexual abuse on women. But when men have been interviewed, and I was involved in a study about 20 years ago that did this, men told us two things that were particularly important. One was they felt that they had allowed themselves to be abused. In other words, regardless of what age they were, if they were men, if they were true men, they should have somehow been able to fight off the abuse or forestall the abuse in some way. And because they couldn't, there was something wrong with them. That was the first thing, that they were somehow targeted for not being masculine enough. And hand in hand with that was the fear that they were targeted because they were gay. And so consequently, the men responded by going into gender stereotypes and trying to prove themselves to be masculine and in some cases not gay. And so consequently, this not only means that their parenting tends to conform to quite rigid gender stereotypes, but in addition to that, there's also the belief that a real man doesn't talk about problems. So if a problem comes up with a relationship, or in an interrelationship, there's the belief that the man needs to keep that to himself and somehow sort it out. And this, of course, prevents people from seeking help. It also has an impact on playing with children. And I want to cite someone else who's had some experience in this area, trying to work on attachment with men to children, and that's Rosie Martin, who works in the Chatter Matters program in the prisons, where they use a circle of security. She's also found the very same thing that we found, which is that men are reluctant to engage with their children for several reasons. And one is because it seems silly to play with the children, or it seems non-masculine. And for some men, and this is particularly men whose only experience of kindness was in the context of being groomed for sexual abuse. You might think about that for a moment. If that's the only time that people were ever actually kind, was when they were actually setting you up to be even unkind, unkinder, it gives you a very different experience of kindness from presumably the way most of us would have experienced it. So it's not an expression of love, it's rather a prelude to serious abuse. And so when you ask people to be nice and kind to their children, and for example, the scene from Circle of Security that some of you may be familiar with, where the man tracks the baby's emotions by, I think that was one of the authors of Circle of Security, but they track the baby's emotions by talking to the baby. A lot of men respond to that as, he's grooming that child. He's not the father of that child. Why is he talking to the child that way? These sorts of things. And it actually becomes very difficult for them to go past the point and realize that they could do this with their own children, because it seems to them that they're becoming sexual abusers. And one of the things that we've noticed is that many of the men actually distance themselves from their children because they actually feel that this makes the children safer. They may leave the child alone because they don't want the child to interact with other parents or with staff or other children, because again, they fear that that puts the child at risk, but they may distance themselves in their own relationship with their children. Again, from the outside, we would observe, we would think, well, this is an attachment issue. But from the inside, it looks very different. From the inside, it looks much more like not an attachment issue, but rather an actual protective behavior, which is something we often don't think about. So all of this has really caused us to look at the way the program develops and to think about ways that we could make the program more trauma-informed, which Bob will now discuss.
I might hand over to David for that.
Dave will discuss. There you go.
Hi, my name's David Taylor. I'm the program leader. I work on site with the dads and the children at the DIY complex. Around the program goals, as a result of the research and the experiences that we've had in this program over the last few years, the program is focused on selecting basic and simple program goals that are targeted at the specific needs of the dads and the children. Programs, especially psychoeducational ones, don't tend to work very well in this group. And the challenge for us as staff is to try to move away from contracting or any sort of rigid programming. And as the slide says, the men are easily disappointed by those trying to help them. We find that most of the men that are in the program are coming from a life where they've rarely trusted anybody who's come into their life and tried to help them. So that's a big challenge for us as staff. Instituting a trauma-informed program is the basis of the work we do there, creating a safe space for the men and also creating a safe space for the children. And that's something that I talk to the men a lot about, particularly as being part of the community out there, is that they also have a role in creating a safe space for other dads that are there and other children that are there as well. Part of our role out there is to assist the men with practical issues that they have identified themselves, which is around things that we've spoken about before, like obtaining a driver's license or working out how to pay off debts so that they're able to get their license. There's also other issues around filling, simple things about filling out forms for excursions for their children who are in school. So the assistance that we provide out there around all those practical things is very wide and varied. Also, the program is really good at supporting the men to be able to manage a tenancy and to be able to realise the importance of, having your rent paid on time, keeping the house in good condition. The inspections are regular, and we feel that this is a good thing because, it kind of keeps the dads in the forefront of their mind that, to be able to maintain a tenancy, that they need to look after the house and maintain that the house is safe and hygienic for their children as well. So helping the men and the children to emotionally regulate is a big task that we have at times. We try to role model a level of calmness that assists them to be able to regulate their emotions as well. And the other thing that the program does really well is that it doesn't have an end date. So we are prepared to travel with the men and the children for as long as it takes, and we find that that's a real strength of the program.
Okay, just in summing up, these men are us. They experience difficulties we all experience, just in more concentrated multiples. They love their children and want the very best for them. That's apparent by everything that they display. It's amazing. As trauma survivors themselves, most of the challenges working with them relate to side effects of effective ways they manage and continue to manage dangerous situations. Some of us have been in the same situation as these men. Some will be in the future and there, but for the grace of God, go we all. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that, guys. That was really, really interesting. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. I've been looking forward to this workshop all week, to be perfectly honest.
Oh.
I might start with a little bit of feedback that we've got through the Q&A forum at the moment. So Tiana said, so many points around sexual abuse and how that may change to the way the father can relate or to play with their child was fascinating. Can't wait to listen back to this talk again. She's also said, love that the program does not have an end date. So powerful. So just to get started with some of the questions as well, if you guys are ready. So first one we've got is, can you describe what a typical day looks like for men engaging with this program?
Okay, so typically with the dads that have 100% care of their children, I find when I turn up for work in the morning that the dads are up, they've got their kids ready for school, and they're either in the process of taking them to school or just finalising that process. So for the other dads that are in the program, as I mentioned before about how there's been such a good community built up there, I think I've seen a lot of examples of other dads helping dads that are getting their kids off to school, helping them with that process. So yeah, it's quite amazing to see them all work together in that situation. Not all the dads have kids that are going to school, but you know, it's really encouraging to see that happen. During the day, myself and our activities officer will spend a couple of hours with dads in the morning, having a chat about you know, things that perhaps, you know, they need to address, any sort of issues that they might have that is pressing that we can help them with. We also just have some casual interaction and some banter, and we feel like this is a good way to kind of gauge how the community's going and how they're going as individuals. Sometimes in the afternoon it's quite quiet around the place, and usually everyone's off doing their own thing. And then later on in the afternoon, when the kids start arriving home from school, as I said, we have an activities officer there who will spend some time with the children while dads are either preparing dinner or finishing some housework and things like that. And also sometimes the dads will be there and engage in that process as well. So it's a good opportunity then to role model and set an example of, you know, what is good, healthy, you know, parent-child interaction.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a question as well from Tiana, who just wants to know if the program runs in the north of the state as well.
Now, as far as I know, this program doesn't exist anywhere else in Australia, and definitely not in Tasmania. It's the only one. It's and that's why we're talking about it, I suppose, is to let people know that it's not only there, but also the challenges around it. It's very important.
Can I say something? There's another thing as well that we wanted to talk about, and that was the fact that these dads often are seen in other settings, but they are misjudged in those settings. People don't understand that they are trauma survivors, and that their reactions are typical of people who have been through trauma, and they need to be supported as they're trying to cope with these multiple things. So we also wanted to draw attention to the needs of this particular group and to our professional response to this group as well.
There was a place in Canberra that was doing work around men, but I think that's no longer the case. Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. So the next question we have is that you mentioned that programs don't necessarily work very well for participants. What are staff moving towards instead of this?
Yeah, you can go. Ron will talk to that.
I'll just briefly, and I'll give it back to Bob, I think. But what we've done is we've had to simplify the program very much. Rather than working towards goals and these sorts of things, we still take the goals of the men very seriously and help them achieve them. But we've tried to instead make it trauma informed around two principles. One is we want the men to feel safe in the actual complex, to feel safe with each other, which means which is basically working on skills of how to live with people, and to have their children feel safe with them and vice versa. So that's been the sort of major thing. So if anything, there's been a great simplification of the program. We've taken it down to really the basic things that we think are most important for this particular group, and also, of course, working in cooperation with them. So it's not just, we don't just sit and make it all up, but rather we're talking to the men all the time and getting their feedback and having community meetings and this sort of thing with them, so that we've primarily not gone from programming, but we've primarily trying to make it on the basis of relationships and improved relationships. Okay, over to you guys.
No, that's pretty good. The basicness is important because it can get very messy and very convoluted for the men, and they're not able to navigate their pathways as easily.
Yeah, there's a lot of boundaries around literacy and things like that as well. So anything sort of structured that involves anything like other than relationship sort of work can be quite difficult. So yeah, I think the more practical stuff and the more stuff that we're seeing some success with is around relationship building and, you know, just learning how to live in a community.
Yeah, if I can make one other comment. When I moved into my current house, I didn't have to sign a contract. It might be controversial, but you know, most of us go through our lives without being put through the kind of programming that these men experience too regularly, really.
Okay, so next up, can you explain what happens to men when they exit the program, and do you continue to support them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In a nutshell, we're trying to help the men and their children get to permanent accommodation. And just about everyone that's had full-time care of their dad, actually everyone has moved into a permanent accommodation and kept their kids. And 3 have started out part-time at the place and moved into full-time care of their children, which has been quite interesting. Once the stability's come around the men, things seem to change. We don't extend beyond, really. We try to have a few visits after they've moved, just to see how they're going. We try to keep services intact if they've got services attending to them.
Some of us do.
Some, yes, yeah. Someone very, very much does. It is the next step, really, in our program to try and resource it so we can do that. And that's what it comes down to, budgeting for it and making it happen. We know it's needed. Housing first is super important, and we continue that care and attention that people can travel well and keep improving in their lives. Part-time dads have not been successful. We've taken dads in who have had 27% care of their kids, which is the minimal recognition by family law and Centrelink. And generally any dad under 50% care has gone away without any care of their children and without a house to live in. So the excursion around that's been that the dads have had a lot of downtime, who have been part-time, and they haven't wanted to engage with us at all. During that time, they've either invited people on and caused havoc, or they've gone out and might have ended up in the justice system. So it's an area of exploration for us to try and improve on. And that's why we pared the program back to very basic approaches, trying to build around those relationships. Fundamental.
And in the short time that I've been there, I have had a couple of dads that have exited, and they have been coming back for advice, general conversation, and just to tidy up loose ends with other services and things like that. So
yeah, they often do, don't they?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's encouraging, and welcomed. I welcome that.
Yeah, yeah. In addition, I've continued to work with some of the dads for several years after they left.
Yes. Thank you.
Wonderful. So the final question that we have today is, have you received any formal feedback from participants or children, and what was this?
Yeah, we have, I guess, a survey or a questionnaire that runs through the program. We have an opening 3-monthly review and a closing interview. And the questions have a continuity, so they're very similar. And the scoring that's built around it and the language is fairly basic and pared down. And we have tried to gauge teenagers particularly around their own goal setting and their own feedback. And the feedback that we've had from the participants have always, they've led it to where we're at today, really. It's been valuable. And with our other programs, Small Steps, it's very similar, that the feedback generates a whole deepening of the way we do the program and try to review it and reflect on it and improve it. So yeah, it's essential and it's crucial. And I forgot to say also that the program is self-funded by Hobart City Mission. It's doesn't have any outside funding from government. It's all donor-based. So it's a fabulous supported program for 4 years.
Yeah, wow. That's really impressive. Yeah. Well, that is actually all we probably have time for today, unfortunately, which is good. We had some great questions come through. So thank you for everyone who took part in the workshop. If you've enjoyed this one and you want to keep talking, we actually have had just one more question come through that I'll say really quickly because it should be a yes or no. Can they follow you on social media? The program, that is.
I believe Hobart City Mission has a Facebook page, and there's often stories up there from the dads, and it's something we can work on. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Look across the activities officer. Yeah, definitely on the Hobart City Mission Facebook, somewhere.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Yeah, but if anyone wants to keep the conversation going, just remember you can go to the Slack channel and find the workshop 2_homeless fathers channel to keep chatting with other people. Thank you so much, Bob, David and Rob. We've really appreciated you coming in today. I've loved your chat. I've got a lot out of it. I really love the program. It sounds great, and I'm sure participants feel the same as well. So our next workshop in this room is going to be with Nikki Terenas, and she'll be presenting Brains and Bodies in Transition. If you're interested in joining this workshop, you just need to leave the meeting and click on the link on your program to Nikki's workshop. You can find all the workshop and presentation links either on the online program, where you can just click the subject and it will take you to the correct room, or on the Anglicare Conference website. Also, just a really quick thank you as well to those of you who sent in images for the lunchtime activity. We've got some of those already, and we'd love you to keep sending them in if you'd like, and we'll keep this open until the end of the day. Text them through if you'd like to 0400 224 942. But remember, no children's faces, please. Thank you all again so much for coming in today, and I'll see you all in the next workshop. Thanks.